Podcasting from Hartford, you're listening to the Connecticut Scoreboard Podcast.
So, Bill, you're joining us the day before UConn-Providence, a rivalry I know everyone is really excited to get back underway. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Jared. Thank you.
So, Bill, this season seems to have definitely been up and down for Providence. Picked in the preseason poll third in the Big East, got off to a pretty good start at 3-1 in the conference, but have now been 2-7 when you look at the recent record. Take us through what this season has been like for Providence so far.
Couple close losses, I think, might have set them on the wrong track. At home against Creighton, you lose on a dunk at the buzzer by Christian Bishop. On the road at Xavier, you lose on a three-pointer at the buzzer. Those tend to carry some hurt over time, some pain, maybe plant some seeds of doubt. And I also look at Providence and I just see a team that so far performance-wise has been incomplete. You have two really good players out front in David Duke and Nate Watson, but you're not necessarily getting much consistently from the rest. And so I think the deeper you get into the year, the more opposing coaches have a chance to scout you and game plan for you. I think they've just gradually been exposed a little bit over time.
When you take a look at their schedule, they've got some great wins. They go on the road, beat Creighton in Omaha. They've beaten Seton Hall, but then you lose to some of the bottom tier teams in Georgetown and Butler. What has set apart Providence in those games where they've beaten some of those top Big East teams? And then how does that compare to when they've lost to a Georgetown or a Butler?
Well, you just look at the Creighton game on the road and you consider the contribution that you got from somebody like Alan Breed, who's a freshman, who's starting at the point guard spot with Jared Bynum unavailable due to a groin strain. Alan Breed has 15 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists against Creighton. You get the usual production from Nate Watson. He has 29 in that game. David Duke is good enough, has 12 points, 5 assists, and plays 36 minutes. So you think, okay, there's the third person in with Breed. But that's been too uncommon. There have been some other games like at Georgetown. They lost by 1. Duke had a really tough day. That was a game where A.J. Reeves had 28 points, but Watson only had 12, and Duke was 2 for 11 from the field. So it's just been too sporadic in terms of the contributions that they've gotten. If those two lead guys aren't playing at an elite level, Providence's ceiling just isn't very high.
I know you mentioned a few guys there, and David Duke, Nate Watson, A.J. Reeves. For UConn fans who might not be as familiar with this Providence team, outside of those three, who can really contribute and make a difference in the game come tomorrow night?
I think that's their biggest problem, Jared. I'm not sure they know yet. I'm not sure if they necessarily have a fourth or fifth person who they can rely on all the time. The guys who you're going to see, obviously, are Alan Breed, who's a freshman guard, who's from a power program out of Georgia, state champion out of Georgia, who's played with multiple Power 5 recruits in high school, but someone who's still getting established, 20 games into his college career. You've had a rotating cast of players at the 4, whether it's Noah Horkler, Greg Gant, Ed Croswell, who's a transfer from LaSalle. You had Jimmy Nichols playing up until recently. He's out with an undisclosed illness. So really it's just been trying to fill the 2 spots around Watson, Duke, and Reeves. Those are the 3 established guys coming back. And it's just been a little bit too much of a rotating cast and not enough of a consistent contribution from the rest.
I know it's been a while since UConn has played Providence. In terms of the style of play, what can you expect out of, a recent Ed Cooley team?
Generally, in years past, defense first, grinding, slow the pace on offense, but they've been efficient, reasonably efficient at the offensive end. Defensively, they're having one of the worst seasons in the last 15. They're pushing 100 points allowed per 100 possessions, according to Adjusted Tempo and Ken Palm. Last year, I think they were 92.6. They were a top 25, top 30-ish type defense in the nation. Generally, that's an end of the floor where they're very tough. They're athletic, long, usually very bought in and dedicated at that end. This year, you've seen a little bit of slippage there. Offensively, it's been a mixed bag. You have a good post player in Watson, a veteran guy who lost 20 pounds from last season. He's in great shape. He's good on the block. He could step out to 12, 15 feet. Ideally, you'd have Duke playing off the ball. That's where he's most effective as a shooting guard, has pro size, but needs someone next to him to facilitate a little bit. The last 6 or 7 games, he's shooting about 30% from the field. And I think a lot of that is because he's trying to create his own shot, whether it's off the dribble or being the focus of the opposing defense every night. Reeves is pretty much a spot-up three-point shooter. Generally operates on the right wing, and it's going to be looked for by Duke, either that or an inside-out pass from Watson. Breed has some length, can get to the rim a little bit, but he is still really young in his career. If Bynum is somehow able to come back, he's missed the last 8 or 9 games with a groin strain. He's very much a pass-first point guard, a guy who can quarterback a team, who doesn't turn the ball over very much, but who isn't really a shooter and isn't really going to be an offensive threat on his own. Otherwise, who knows what's going to happen for Providence? The biggest reason for their struggles recently is just that lack of consistency at both ends.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the rivalry aspects. I know you being in Rhode Island and covering the Providence team here. What can you tell us about the Ed Cooley, Dan Hurley rivalry and some of the feelings between the two there?
Well, I cover Rhode Island as well. And so, obviously that great matchup every year that wasn't played this year, but PC and URI is the blood feud here. You've got public versus private. You've got the establishment program against, sort of little brother. It's just all the makings of a great college basketball rivalry. When Dan was here, he's rebuilding. Ed was a couple of years ahead of him and had Providence pretty well established. Ed went 5-1 against him in games, PC and URI head-to-head. Danny won the last one in 2017-18 on his way to his second NCAA tournament in a row. I know over time, the two of them got to be pretty close. They lived in the same neighborhood in East Greenwich. They worked out at the same gym, usually at like 6 a.m. in the morning. I know that they both have college-age type kids, so they have that sort of going on. Danny's kids, obviously, his son Danny and now his son Andrew, who's a walk-on there. Ed has a couple older kids, Isaiah and Olivia, who's actually a student at Georgetown. So, there's a lot of comparing of notes there of just being dads. I think that's part of the bond that they have. I also think that they look at each other and they see two guys who, are from inner cities. Danny grew up in Jersey City. Ed grew up in Providence, not the best half of Providence. Sort of scrapped their way through their careers and have ended up running good programs. Danny being at UConn, that's a job that I'm sure he always aspired to as someone who played at Seton Hall and knows the Big East well. Ed being a Providence guy, he always wanted to be the coach at Providence. That was, Providence has always been the big brand. And so I think, the two of them have a healthy amount of respect for each other. I think they're both admirers of what each other has done, but don't expect either one to take a half step back when their teams play on the floor, because that's just not who they are.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your thoughts, having covered him at Rhode Island and seeing him work on rebuilding that program to where it is today. What are your thoughts on the rebuilding process he's done at UConn and where they are right now?
Primarily, this being year 3, I'd be able to make a lot better evaluation if they were healthy at all. If he had a Cook, if he had James Bouknight from start to finish, I think this would be a lot different team. Just in terms of culturally and talent level, I think he's right on schedule. He's right about where he was at URI. They were an NIT team his 3rd year. The difference being he goes to UConn with all of that machinery, that brand, that ability to recruit at a high level. He has better players already. He has a practice facility. He has charters. He has all the things that an elite program has that he had to scratch and claw and beg for at Rhode Island. So I would say that if UConn fans are able to make it through this year, I would imagine that they're frustrated at times, that they see a slow offense, that they're upset that guys are hurt and not playing, and that this team should have a higher ceiling than what it's shown. I understand that. I think if this team was healthy, they'd look a lot different. I think next year you're going to see a team that looks a lot different. He's recruited at a high level. Obviously, the class he has coming in for 21-22 is really good. It's a top 10 class nationally. I just think, I look at UConn, Jared, and I look at the last 2 years of Kevin Ollie, And I think of UConn being 30 and 35 over 2 years.
Yeah.
And I just look at that and I think to myself, how badly things had to have gone off track for a place like UConn to be 5 games under 500 in a 2-year period. I think Dan had a lot to clean up there from a talent standpoint, just from a program dedication, attitude standpoint, coaching guys hard and trying to get guys to be responsible on a day in, day out basis. I think that takes some time to weed some of that out, and also to bring in some of your own players. So I think he's right on schedule with where he's supposed to be. I think he'd be even further ahead if his guys were healthy. And I think he's right on the verge of doing great things at UConn.
I think it's going to be interesting too. We might get the chance to get the James Bouknight return tomorrow. I know that's been rumored a bit, so might get to kick off the UConn-Providence renewed rivalry with a little extra punch there on the UConn side. And I'll get you out of here on this one. In terms of this rivalry between UConn and Providence, I know sometimes it's been more viewed from a Providence side. UConn now excited to be back in the Big East playing Providence. What are some of the thoughts in the area about these two teams playing again and UConn being back in the Big East?
Well, as a neutral, as somebody who didn't go to either school, I think it's fantastic. UConn was an odd fit in the AAC. It's obviously a football decision, a revenue decision. Basketball is what built UConn athletics on the men's side and on the women's side. And so coming back to the Big East, it is a return to their roots. Providence was a great independent program in the 60s and in the 70s, but it is also on a different level because of its affiliation with the Big East and building its men's basketball brand. So I think from that perspective, they have that in common. They have geography in common. They're recruiting a lot of the same kids they have for years and years, whether it's out of the New England prep ranks or New York or New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be in on a lot of the same guys, offering a lot of the same guys. UConn has a commitment from Corey Floyd. His father played at Providence. He was somebody who was recruited by both schools. And that's the type of guy that you're going to see both schools associated with. But I just think it's a natural thing for both of these programs to be playing each other. I think it's a great regional game. I think it's really interesting when you look at how Providence feels UConn coming back into the Big East is going to affect the conference. It obviously lifts the league's brand, but I think Providence fans might be wondering to themselves where they'll sort out in hierarchy in all this. I think when the league split and UConn left and the others did as well, Syracuse, Pittsburgh, all the rest, I think Villanova really took advantage and really staked their claim toward the top of the league. I think it was a good thing for someone like Creighton to come into the league and get established. I think Providence and Seton Hall have benefited as well. They've had good seasons recently and played at or near the top of the league. Some of the old Big East programs, the powers like Georgetown and St. John's, haven't necessarily. So when I look at UConn coming in, I think that UConn immediately and going forward has the chance to cut into some market share that Seton Hall and Providence might have gained. I think you're going to see Villanova stay at or near where they are, so long as Jay Wright is there. I'm interested to see what might happen with Creighton. But in terms of just natural order of programs performing at their maximum, UConn's a top 3 program in this league. And I don't think it's going to be very long until they are there consistently year over year.
Bill, really appreciate the time. Looking forward to getting things kicked off tomorrow and for hopefully, knock on wood, 2 matchups in a week between these 2 schools. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, Bill, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate the time.
Jared, thank you. My pleasure.